13-year-old boy who unearthed sinister photos of his father could never have imagined that it would lead to his murder. But before we get started, welcome to True Crime with Maneater. If you love all things true crime, including missing person cases, cold cases, and just the strange happenings of the world, you've come to the right place. Be sure to subscribe and turn on alerts so you never miss video upload. Let's get started. Dylan Redwine was a 13-year-old boy who was dealing with a turbulent family situation. His father, Mark Redwine, and his mother, Elaine, were going through a divorce after 18 years of marriage. Elaine would say that Mark became a different person through this divorce. Although he wasn't a great husband in general, he became more angry as they were divorcing. And this anger would spew until it turned into a custody battle. Eventually, Elaine would win full custody of both her son Dylan and Corey, and she would move them to Colorado Springs. But unfortunately, Dylan was still forced to see his father because of these court-ordered visits. His brother Corey was much older now and didn't have to go. Dylan's mother, Elaine, would describe her son as somebody who was just a giving soul. He never wanted to see anybody unhappy, and he would make sure he could do everything in his power to make people happy. And Dylan's older brother, Corey, was one of his best friends. In November of 2012, Dylan was preparing for one of these visits, and since he moved to Colorado Springs with his mother, he was going to take a flight because it was approximately 300 miles away from his father's home. Dylan's mother and friends would say that Dylan was not looking forward to this visit, and he really did not want to go visit his father. Dylan Redwine was last seen alive on November 18th, 2012. After his flight landed, Mark and Dylan went to Walmart, then McDonald's, and then they went back to his father's home. And in the surveillance videos from Walmart and the airport, you can see how little interaction is happening between Dylan and his father, Mark. Dylan Redwine was never seen again from that point forward. Dylan would simply vanish, and no one seemed to know what happened, including his father, Mark. Mark reported his son missing on November 19th, 2012, after he returned home from running errands. Dylan's last communication was sent to a friend on November 18th, which was the night before he was reported missing, at 9:37 p.m. And he basically was making a plan to visit that friend at 6:30 a.m. the following morning. Except he wouldn't arrive to see his friend that day. Of course, Mark would deny very much having anything to do with his son's disappearance.
Thank you so much for speaking with me on camera, Mark.
You're welcome.
What's it been like?
Well, it's been a tough time for all of us. I know. I know that it's been difficult on me, and I can only imagine how difficult it's been for his mom and his brother and his family over in the Colorado Springs area. And, we're doing everything we can to try to find Dylan, and we want to keep the focus on finding Dylan. And, I've been working with the investigators to make sure that all the bases are being covered on that end. And, that's pretty much where I'm at with that. I mean, I'm doing everything I know how to do.
I want to get the subject out of the way first. There's a lot of suspicion out there. Even when Elaine went on ABC News.
Right.
She was. Can you address that?
Well, I can only imagine being a mother, the frustration of hearing about your son going missing. And, I can only think that has to do with lashing out and trying to find who's accountable for this in this situation. I've been working closely with the investigators to do what needed to be done because, it was last seen at my house. I know there's rumors going around that he's been spotted by people, and, our concern is that, something has happened to the point now where we just want to keep in the public's eye, Dylan's face and keep the focus on Dylan and, don't worry about me and everything's going to be all right on my end. But I know this is only a troubling time for Elaine and my son Corey, and I spoke with him last night. And, I'm surprised that we haven't been able to hook up today because, one of the things that we're trying to do is unite together. And I have my oldest son from the Phoenix area here, and of course my brother's here. So we're trying to unite as a family and stay focused on what's important here. And everybody wants to focus on me, but the focus isn't me right now. The focus is finding Dylan, and that's where I'm at.
Why do you think people want to focus on you?
Well, because I think it's just a natural part of the process, and I think because, he was last seen with me, and he was with me the night before. And, I saw him the morning that I left to go run my errands. That's the logical place to start. And so it doesn't at all surprise me, that they searched my home yesterday, because quite frankly, I was expecting that to happen a week ago. So, my opinion is we're all a week late in where we're at with this in that. So really the focus is, what do we need to be doing now to keep searching for Dylan and bring him home?
Do you have anything directly to say to Dylan?
Dylan, my prayers are with you, and I love you very much. He was the light of my life, and he meant everything to me. And I just want him home, just like everybody else does. And that's why, we got to keep searching for him, because somebody knows something. We got to find him, and we need to know that he's okay.
He did contact his ex-wife, Elaine, and Elaine would say that he seemed relatively calm. He didn't seem overly concerned about the whereabouts of their son. But Elaine, who's 300 miles away in Colorado Springs, would jump right into action. She would file a missing persons report at her home in Colorado Springs. But Mark kept insisting that Dylan probably just ran away. Dylan's mother, Elaine, would not hear of it. She knew that if Dylan wanted to get away from his father, he would have contacted her, and a massive search for the young 13-year-old boy was underway. Elaine and her son Corey would dive into searching for Dylan. Unfortunately, Mark seemed less enthusiastic about helping search for his son, and police immediately knew that something sinister had happened to Dylan. Mark's home and vehicle were searched, and suspicion really fell towards him immediately. Mark would claim that he got up, he left the house, he did his errands, and when he got back, there was a bowl of cereal on the table and Nickelodeon was on. And he has no idea what happened to his son. Elaine would eventually drop a bombshell to police, and she would tell the police about something that happened the last time Dylan and Corey were together at their father's home. In 2011, Dylan, Corey, and Mark would go on a road trip together. During this road trip, as they're staying in a hotel, Dylan was using his father's laptop, and he came across something completely startling. So he would wake his older brother, Corey, and they would go into the bathroom, lock the door, and Dylan would show his brother what he found on that laptop that belonged to his father. Dylan would show Corey images of their father dressed in women's lingerie, like underwear and a bra. There was photos of him in a diaper, and even more disturbing, there was photos and videos of their father eating feces from a diaper. And after this, Dylan very much did not want to be around his father. After discovering those images, he was very uncomfortable about what his father was doing in his free time. Just something did not sit right with him, which is very understandable. Anybody that would stumble across something like that would feel very uncomfortable being around that person. It's just not a normal thing to eat feces. So throughout 2012, Dylan would tell everybody how uncomfortable he was around his father and how much he no longer wanted to visit him. But a couple months before Dylan went missing, Corey had told Mark, their father, that both him and Dylan knew about these pictures. And that night that they had discovered the pictures in 2011, Corey had actually taken photos to save on his phone. One day, Dylan would message Corey and say that he needed those photos. And this was because he basically was really upset in the way that Mark was talking about Elaine and Corey, and he was going to confront his father using those pictures. I believe his father was saying something like Corey was a bad influence on Dylan, and Dylan had had enough of hearing this, so he was going to show him the pictures and be like, "You're the bad influence. What is this?" In June of 2013, Dylan's body was located during a search of Middle Mountain, but the boy's head wasn't with his body. And it wasn't until 2015 when hikers would locate the skull of Dylan, and his skull was found nearly 2 miles away from his body. Mark would say that, well, maybe an animal attacked and killed him, because there are tons of dangerous animals in Colorado, mountain lions, bears. Anything could have gotten a hold of him and killed him. Experts would say that Dylan most likely died from skull fractures as well as sharp force injuries, meaning that on the skull they found knife imprints, or what they think is knife imprints. And by this point, Elaine is absolutely convinced that her ex-husband murdered their son. But Mark would very much deny this. He said he had nothing to do with it, that he would take a polygraph test, and even went on Dr. Phil. And as he's getting ready to take the polygraph, he basically says, "I don't feel so well. I think we need to do this tomorrow."
You should be doing backflips right now to take this polygraph test. You were the last person to have seen your son before he disappeared.
Well, and I don't believe that.
What do you believe?
I believe that the postal worker that saw Dylan later that afternoon, before I went looking for him,
No doubt in your mind.
2:30. There's no doubt.
And I read some of the stuff you said about you don't think that we gave enough attention to finding Dylan yesterday. Are you kidding me? I devoted 2 hours of national television time to try to find your son. And I have asked you to do things to eliminate yourself so we can direct resources to other people, and you won't do one damn thing to help. And you want to criticize what we're doing?
I think that was taken out of text, and I didn't have this
then
conversation.
You put it in context.
I put it in context. I was referring specifically to the conversation that was taking place on the stage with you and my ex-wife together.
What you do with your ex-wife and what you do with your son, you've got years of history before you get here with me. Don't lay that at my feet, my friend.
I was upset about the fact that obviously there's a huge issue in terms of me and my ex-wife and my son.
I am here to find your son. And I frankly don't give a damn whether you like me or my television show. I care whether or not we find this boy. And if you've got information about where that boy is, you need to tell us. This man's done 3,500 polygraphs. You know how many fathers with missing sons have ever refused to take a polygraph? In all of his years of doing polygraph work, you know how many have done what you've done? 0. You, Mark, you're it.
And obviously, if you don't feel well, you can't take a polygraph because it could skew the results. Eventually, more evidence would come to light that would paint Mark in a different light. He would start by claiming that those pictures the boys found were photoshopped. So he was basically like, these are fake. I don't have anything to do with it. Somebody photoshopped them. This is not what I do in my free time. On June 27, 2013, after Dylan's remains had been located, Dylan's half-brother, Brandon, reported an odd conversation that he had had with their father, Mark. Apparently, Mark had mentioned blunt force trauma numerous times, and he said that investigators would have to find the rest of the body and the skull to determine a cause of death. That's an interesting conversation for a father that had no idea what happened to his son to be having. It seems more like a man who's worried about detectives closing in on him. Shortly after Dylan disappeared, investigators would contact Mark's ex-wife, Betsy Horvath, and Betsy would tell investigators that she believes Mark would hurt Dylan. And she said that Mark had told her numerous times that if he ever had to get rid of a body, he would leave it in the mountains. And while him and Betsy were going through this turbulent divorce, much like his divorce with Elaine, they would get into a custody battle. And during this custody battle, Mark violated the orders constantly. His ex-wife would say that he threatened her and said that he would kill the kids before he ever let her have them. And her sister had been there to hear the threat. As I mentioned earlier, when Dylan went missing, his father would allow police and forensics to come in the house and search it. And that seemed to be quite the mistake. Dylan's blood was found in the living room, and cadaver dogs did indicate that a deceased person had been in the living room and the bed of his pickup truck. They also noted that Dylan's remains were located in an area that his father was familiar with and rode ATVs around that area. They noted that at the time of Dylan's disappearance, him and his father were having a very troubled relationship, and Dylan very adamantly did not want to be around his father. So not only was Dylan's blood found in the living room, it was found on the couch, the floor in front of the couch, the corner of the coffee table, on the floor beneath a rug, and a love seat. It's important to note that Mark's home had been severely damaged by a fire, and a remodel of the home had been done in March of 2012. And according to Mark's own words, Dylan had limited visitations after the home had been remodeled. And during those limited visits, he had suffered no serious injuries that would cause the massive amount of blood that was identified at his home. So the home was remodeled before November 2012 when Dylan went missing. Two of Elaine's friends would come forward and say that they did argue with Mark in front of his home. When they referenced the pictures that Dylan found of his father, Mark grew enraged at Elaine's friends. They said he immediately grew violent. He picked up a log, he put it over his head, and he was walking towards them with it like he's gonna throw it at them. They immediately drove off to get away from him. And finally, in 2017, Mark Redwine was arrested for the murder and child abuse of his son. And in July of 2021, he was sentenced to 48 years for both second-degree murder and child abuse. Of course, he denies anything that has to do with Dylan going missing and his murder, and he is appealing his case. But the fact is, there was a lot of blood in his home, and his son was decapitated. And experts would testify that no animal is going to move a skull about 2 miles away from the body of where the body originally was. There would be more parts scattered. Corey's victim impact statement was incredibly sad, but also quite endearing. Corey would say, "Dylan is my hero. He became more of a man in 13 years than Mark has in 60. I'm so proud of Dylan and what he stood for. I'm sorry for the beautiful woman who will never share his love and the people who will never share his common love for all. It inspires me that Dylan's action over the course of his life are what will be remembered and not Mark's words or his lies. Dylan's name will run through our family forever." So this case is incredibly sad. I hate cases that have to deal with parents murdering their children. I just can never imagine what brings somebody to that point. He could have sent Dylan back to Elaine and never saw his kid ever again, and that would be just fine. But instead, he decided to murder his son. And it seems like there was no real reason to murder Dylan, other than he found these photos and may have brought them up in an argument. And it makes sense because allegedly, if those pictures were brought up, Mark would become violent. And I feel like there are so many unanswered questions. First and foremost, why was Dylan forced to see his father when he stood in front of a judge and said, "This man makes me uncomfortable and I don't want to go"? He was 13 years old. He could voice what he wanted or didn't want. And if somebody was making him uncomfortable, why did he have to go? That has to account for something. And second, why was Mark taking those pictures in general? Was he part of some online community? He took them for a reason and was doing what he was doing for a reason. Yeah, I can't seem to uncover exactly what it is that he was doing these for. Of course, I don't want to kink shame or anything like that. He was dressing in women's clothing. But again, it's quite different from eating feces out of a diaper. I don't know. It just doesn't sit right with me. But that's it for today, guys. If you like this video or any other video on my channel, be sure to subscribe and turn on alerts so you never miss video upload. If you have a suggestion for a case, pop it in the comments below and I'll be sure to get to it. Check out some other videos on my channel while you wait, and I'll see you next time.